In most trials, you see fear, regret, maybe even denial. But when Richard Ramirez faced court, he didn't flinch. He behaved like a superstar, a stage-to-get performance, to revel into his notoriety, and to showcase his attitude. He made the courtroom feel more like a ritual than a place of justice. This is the story of how a killer turned his trial into a spectacle, and how justice fought to silence the chaos. Welcome back to Prison Stories. In this video, we're diving into one of the most disturbing trials in American history, the courtroom descent of Richard Ramirez, better known as the Night Stalker. From his bizarre outbursts to the cult-like attention he received from the public, this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a spectacle soaked in fear, fame, and evil. Let's begin with how the trial started, and how Ramirez made it clear from day one that this wouldn't be a normal case. By the time Richard Ramirez was arrested in 1985, California was suffocating in fear. For over a year, he had terrorized neighborhoods across Los Angeles and San Francisco, breaking into homes at night, murdering at random, and leaving behind brutal scenes that even seasoned detectives were shaken. He didn't have a clear pattern. His victims were young and old, rich and poor, men and women. The only consistency was the cruelty and the satanic symbols he left behind. When Ramirez was finally caught by a group of citizens on the street, it wasn't just relief. It was chaos. Reporters swarmed. Helicopters hovered. The press labeled him the Night Stalker, and that name stuck. But when the public finally saw him, pale, sunken eyes, long hair, and a smirk that never seemed to fade, they weren't looking at a monster in chains. They were looking at someone who seemed proud. As his trial approached, it became clear this case wouldn't just be about evidence and witnesses. It would become a spectacle. And Ramirez, he was ready to perform. When Richard Ramirez entered the courtroom, he didn't look nervous, afraid, or even remotely remorseful. For someone facing such grave accusations, his demeanor was chillingly calm. The charges against him were some of the most serious imaginable. 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. Each one tied to a brutal and seemingly random crime that had terrorized California throughout the mid-1980s. Jury selection for Richard Ramirez's trial began on July 22nd, 1988, and it immediately became clear this was no ordinary case. With wall-to-wall media coverage and the horrific nature of the crimes, nearly 1,600 prospective jurors had to be screened. Just finding an impartial jury was a massive task. The scale of preparation hinted at the grueling and emotionally intense trial that was about to unfold. Once the trial began, the prosecution presented a mountain of damning evidence. Among the most crucial was a shoe print left at one of the crime scenes, matched to a rare obvious sneaker that Ramirez had been wearing. Investigators also recovered a black cap at a scene, which a store clerk later identified as one Ramirez had purchased just days before. In his locker, police found a jacket and sunglasses that matched those seen by several witnesses. A dental cast taken after his arrest confirmed the distinctive teeth pattern described by survivors, helping tie him directly to their brutal encounters. And perhaps most chilling, a composite sketch based on one surviving victim's description closely resembled Ramirez, further solidifying the case against him. To support this physical evidence, the prosecution called over 100 witnesses to the stand. Some of them were survivors of Ramirez's attacks who bravely identified him in open court. Others were family members of victims, crime scene investigators, and forensic experts. Given that the crime stretched across multiple counties and involved dozens of scenes, the witness list was long and emotionally taxing. While a few struggled to recall every detail years later, many delivered clear and consistent testimony that placed Ramirez at the heart of the crime spree. Their voices helped bring the full scale of his violence into the courtroom, making it impossible for the jury to look away. But despite the overwhelming evidence and emotional testimony unfolding around him, Richard Ramirez seemed completely detached from reality. He didn't behave like a man fighting for his life, or even like someone aware of the gravity of what was happening. Instead, he often lounged in his chair, smirking, laughing, and exchanging glances with people in the courtroom. At one point, he even held up his palm to display a pentagram and shouted, "Hail Satan," in the middle of a hearing. His casual, almost playful behavior shocked observers and deeply angered the families of victims sitting just feet away. To many, it felt like Ramirez wasn't just facing the system, he was mocking it. It was as if Richard Ramirez wasn't just on trial, he was trying to build an image. From the very start, he leaned into his nickname, the Night Stalker, and embraced the darkness it implied. Inside jail, guards discovered that Ramirez had been using his own blood to draw satanic symbols, including inverted pentagrams and the number 666, on the walls and floors of the cell. Everything about him seemed designed to shock, disturb, and intimidate, both inside and outside the courtroom. Then in August 1988, things took a darker turn. Authorities received intelligence suggesting that Ramirez was plotting to smuggle a gun into court and shoot the lead prosecutor. The alleged plan never materialized, but it was taken seriously enough that security was drastically tightened. Metal detectors were installed, and searches became more aggressive. And as if that wasn't enough, just days later, tragedy struck when Phyllis Singletary, one of the jurors who had already been seated in the trial, was found shot to death in her apartment. The murder had nothing to do with Ramirez. It turned out to be a domestic incident, but at the time, panic spread through the jury box. One alternate juror was so terrified she refused to go home. Though unrelated, the timing fed into the growing mythos around Ramirez, as if his presence alone could cause chaos. Throughout the trial, Richard Ramirez couldn't seem to stay quiet. He constantly spoke out in court, often raising his voice, interrupting proceedings, and blurting out aggressive remarks. At times, he would call witnesses liars, shout profanities at the judge, or make sarcastic comments under his breath loud enough for the courtroom to hear. He had no filter and no respect for formal settings.
Expected to. You are not capable of it. I am beyond your experience. I am beyond good and evil. Legions of the night breed. Repeat not the errors of Nightstalker and show no mercy. I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells within us all. That's it.
During tense moments, Ramirez would sometimes laugh, curse, or mutter disturbing phrases, adding a layer of chaos to an already emotionally draining trial. Even when warned or silenced, he showed no concern. His voice always found a way to cut through the courtroom. Well, if Richard Ramirez was building a rough, rebellious image with his carefree attitude and defiant outbursts, it was working, at least on some people. As the trial progressed, dozens of women began showing up in court, not out of outrage or grief, but out of fascination. They sent him love letters, blew him kisses during hearings, and some even showed up dressed in black with pentagrams and symbols, mimicking the dark persona he projected. Some women described him as handsome and misunderstood. Others were simply drawn to his dangerous aura. At one point, he reportedly received over 80 letters a day, many from female admirers. One woman even married him years later, while he was on death row. The attention was so intense that media outlets began referring to his female fans as serial killer groupies, a phenomenon rarely seen on this scale before. It was as if the brutality of his crimes had been completely lost on them, replaced by a twisted attraction to the myth he had become. Despite the fans, the rock star attitude, the courtroom outbursts, and a carefully crafted image of defiance, none of it could save Richard Ramirez. The jury saw past the theatrics. They weren't distracted by his smirks, his sunglasses, or the women blowing kisses from the gallery. They had seen the evidence, heard the witnesses, and listened to the survivors. On September 20th, 1989, Ramirez was found guilty on 43 counts, including 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. The verdict was clear and devastating. Then came November 7th, 1989, the day of sentencing. The judge sentenced him to death in California's gas chamber. But even then, Ramirez didn't break character. As if the entire trial had been a stage, he responded with chilling nonchalance. Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland. It was a disturbing full stop to a trial that had already felt more like a horror show than a court proceeding. While justice had finally been served, Ramirez made sure his appearance in court were as cold and haunting as the crimes he committed. After sentencing, Richard Ramirez was sent to San Quentin State Prison, where he would spend the next 23 years on death row. Even behind bars, his infamy only grew. He gave several television interviews, speaking in the same detached, eerie tone he had shown in court. When asked if he felt any remorse, he shrugged it off, cold, calculated, and still clinging to that dark persona. He continued to receive letters from admirers, and in 1996, he even married one of his supporters, a magazine editor named Doreen Leoie, in a bizarre prison wedding. Ramirez never expressed regret, never apologized to the families of his victims. He lived out his final years surrounded by the myth he had created, until June 7, 2013, when he died of complications related to B-cell lymphoma, long before his execution could ever be carried out. Richard Ramirez wanted to be remembered, and he got his wish, but not as a misunderstood outlaw or dark icon. Behind the sunglasses and satanic slogans was a man who brutally ended lives, tore families apart, and left an entire state in fear. The courtroom theatrics, the cold one-liners, the groupies, they were all distractions from the truth. Ramirez was a predator, and justice finally caught up with him. Thank you for watching Prison Stories. If you have found a video interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe us to watch more crime videos.